Good morning, everyone. Let me just open up to the right page. There we go. So I'm here visiting from the country. But before I moved out there, I lived in Brooklyn for about 10 years. And like Cheryl said, I participated in Farm School NYC as a certificate student, which is a 2-year program. You guys should do it if you're excited about growing food. Yeah, woo. And then part of that program is that you get an apprenticeship in your second year. And the apprenticeship helps you learn things that you wouldn't necessarily learn in a classroom. Farming, gardening, community engagement are not necessarily classroom learned skills. A lot of them take some hands-on training, actually going out into the world. Those apprenticeships helped us gain more knowledge. They helped us develop an intimate and long-term relationship with people, with spaces, with soils, with plants. Farming and gardening take a long time for you to learn because it changes over the course of a season and from one season to the next. One farmer that I worked with said that the shortest period of time in farming is a year because everything changes throughout the season, so you only get to do anything once every year. And if you did it wrong, then that's it. And then the next year you get to try again, and the next year after that. So after 17 seasons, you're like a teenager in farming. So apprenticeships are very valuable. But somewhere along the line, I realized that most of these apprenticeships weren't being paid anything. And I kind of wondered why. So I did a little research, and there is no survey data on paid or unpaid labor in urban agriculture. But anecdotally, we know that a lot of people working, especially in New York, but also in other urban environments, aren't necessarily being paid at all or are being underpaid for their work. Oftentimes, they might be working more hours than they're being paid for because they're committed to the project. And there are a lot of reasons for this, and some of them are good reasons and valid. There are a lot of benefits to urban agriculture, mental and physical and community building benefits. There are organizations that are nonprofits that rely on volunteer labor to get the work done because they don't have enough money or they don't have enough labor to do everything on their own. Specifically in New York, land access is very expensive and often very difficult, leaving much less budget to pay labor. You also have spaces that are small or hard to get into, which means that you're doing most of your work by hand. You're not using a lot of machines, which can reduce the cost of labor. And I think the most important reason is that this isn't specific to urban agriculture, and it's not new. Agriculture has always been unpaid or underpaid, from slavery-based agriculture at the beginning of this country's life to current labor practices, which include modern slavery in some cases, grossly underpaid labor in a lot of cases, and other abuses like not paying health care. So why do people take these positions? I think there are a lot of reasons for that too. A lot of people want to learn how to farm. They're doing this because it's a good learning process, like we were doing at Farm School, and a lot of other people in a lot of other places. Some people want to change the food system, and one way to do that is to get involved in the food system. They want to gain professional contacts, like in any internship or apprenticeship. They want to be part of a community, like what Cheryl was talking about. And part of community building is getting involved and doing the work. They want to gain business experience. Maybe they want to develop food sovereignty in their community. Sometimes when you're changing careers or you don't have a lot of experience, an unpaid position is the only position that's available to you. Sometimes your school required it for graduation, like mine. And then a big reason which I've encountered both in urban and in rural farming is that apprenticeships are one of the best ways to get a farm manager position. Or if you want to eventually own your own farm or start your own project, it's a great way to learn how to do that, to get a lot of in-depth experience. Well, there isn't data about urban agriculture. The USDA census tells us a lot about agriculture labor in general. On average, farm managers make $33 an hour, or $69,000 a year, which was, as a farm manager, kind of a surprise to me. Whereas farm laborers, on average, make $9 an hour or $19,000 a year, which sounded about right. So that's a big reason, right, to want to gain more professional experience to become a farm manager rather than farm laborer, because you just will get more money for this same amount of work. I think it's the same amount of work. So who's taking paid or underpaid positions? Again, we don't have data, we don't have survey data from New York City, but it's probably more diverse in New York than it is in the rural data that we have. Not necessarily by much, we don't really know. We do know that a large majority of people participating in urban agriculture are women, which is also the large majority of people participating in agriculture globally. We do have a survey done in Pennsylvania of 163 apprentices on sustainable farms, the rural farms. And some of the demographics were that they were 95% white, they were 86% women, 77% had bachelor degrees or higher, 70% were under 30, 42% were under 25, and 55% had had multiple internships, and they were described in the survey as young and transient. So this is a pattern of young, educated, white women who were able to bounce from one place to another. So how does that happen? What effect does it have? If people are taking an apprenticeship, they still need to live. They still need to support themselves somehow. So maybe they're supporting themselves because they're being supported by others, maybe their parents, maybe a third party. Maybe they saved up because they were going to have a career change. They worked for a certain number of years, saved a lot of money. Maybe they're working a full-time job at the same time that they're doing a part-time apprenticeship, or they're working a part-time job at the same time as doing a full-time apprenticeship, which means they're not sleeping, and they're working long hours, and they're not taking breaks. And that has a big impact on physical and mental health. But these apprenticeships lead to higher pay, and they lead to leadership roles. Many organizations hire directly from the apprenticeship pool, so it's sort of like a year-long audition for the gig. And then even if you're not hired directly by the company that you apprenticed with, they're basically a line on your resume, their experience that can get you a better job somewhere else. So when we have these sort of conflating influences, who is being left out? Low-income participants who can't afford not to work, older participants who have other obligations, primary caregivers and people who need full-time jobs to support themselves and their families, who can't take time off for something that isn't directly supporting the people they need to support in life, people with disabilities, people who can't afford to be transient or to be in and out of work, and people that come from communities that stigmatize farming might have even more trouble when it's unpaid because they can't even justify it with a paycheck. According to an article from the Center for American Progress titled Women of Color and the Gender Wage Gap by Milia Fisher, women of color are particularly more likely than white women to experience the dual responsibilities of providing for a family, even as they represent a larger share of their family's income. Women of color, particularly African American women and Latinas, are far more likely to be single mothers or single heads of household than their white counterparts. In 2013, more than 1/5, or 21.6% of African American families were led by a single mother. Single mothers also led 14.5% of Hispanic households, compared with only 7.4% of white households and 5.9% of Asian American households. So that's a whole group of people that's being potentially excluded or excluded at a higher rate from these apprenticeships, which give larger opportunities to leadership positions. I've seen this play out in rural agriculture really clearly. I've seen young, educated white people who had participated in some sort of training or apprenticeship program, possibly multiple ones, where they were given managerial training or in-depth learning opportunities, and they were given higher positions. You know, they were often very young, so maybe it was just a crew leader position or an assistant manager position. or a specialized position like a tractor driver, which gets a higher pay than a general laborer. And they were managing people who were much older, often immigrants, often non-native English speakers. They had a lot more experience in farming. Maybe they had 10 years of farm experience, and they were being managed by someone with 1 or 2 years of apprenticeship experience. And the wage gap was high between those two groups. So what can we do about this thing that's creating a gap between the types of people who are getting better jobs in farming? I think that we need to make fair wages for apprentices in all labor, not just in farming. I think that all apprentices and interns should be paid, but specifically in farming, it's a really big practice. And we should make that a priority. If you can't pay your labor, then you need to reassess your cost-benefit analysis of your business. We can form collectives to decrease the amount of labor that we need or to share the cost of that labor. Maybe an apprentice who's being paid by multiple different organizations can actually make a living wage. We can offer or participate in development or business development or incubation programs, working with apprenticeships and interns, both to get them a living wage while they're working for us, but also to advance their ideas and their leadership possibilities to take people who maybe wouldn't have those opportunities otherwise. We can get grants through nonprofit partners to fund education with enough money for a living wage. We can have a smaller, better trained, higher paid workforce with less turnover so that you don't just have apprentices every year who do your labor, you have people that you keep around from one year to the next, and you actually pay them enough money to survive and thrive in that environment. And that actually, from what I've personally experienced, has a profound effect on the quality of work being done, and you end up being a lot more efficient with more experienced labor. You can improve infrastructure and access. So maybe you can't bring a tractor onto your farm in New York City, but you can bring maybe handheld tools or build a ramp into your space, or think of some sort of capital project which might actually decrease your costs in the future with a one-time cost. And also we can take political action. We all have local and state and federal, we do have federal government still, representatives who we can talk to, and I know a lot of us have been talking to them quite a bit, so you know their numbers, and we can talk to them about having agriculture be included in fair wage and fair labor laws, which often it is not included. It's not always necessary legally to pay your agricultural labor a minimum wage. There's an agricultural minimum wage. It's not always legally obligated to give them health insurance or to pay them overtime. I don't make overtime. So getting that changed, getting agriculture out of the stigma of less legitimate labor is really important, and that's a huge political action that we can take. Thank you. Pay your people.